Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Categorically Romance podcast. My name is Bree, and I am here with Andrea, the host of Shelf Love. Andrea, thank you for being here. I wanted to be like, introduce yourself, but like, I'm totally fangirling out. I think me being on your podcast back in like 2019 was my first ever time being on a podcast. So, like, sitting down with you today is so surreal. So, tell my listeners about you. Tell us all about you.
Well, hello. Thank you for having me, Bree. It's wonderful to speak with you one on one again after like 3.5 years or something like that. Um, Thank you for being the first official guest on my podcast, Shelf Love. 3+ years ago, like you were literally my first guest. So I
Oh
had
gosh.
I had no idea what I was doing. I was just playing it by ear. So it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to speak to you again. So hello, my name is Andrea Martucci. I'm the host of Shelf Love, which is a podcast at this point about romance novels and how they reflect, explore, challenge, and shape desire. It's always been a podcast about romance novels, but I've tried different things over the course of time where I used to do more like deep dives into books, and then I started getting a little bit more into scholarship, talking to scholars, doing broader investigations of the genre, and still talking about books, of course, because that's what we're here for, romance novels.
Well, that was like my big question was like, so it's so amazing how the podcast has evolved. Like, how did that happen? Was it like, because I mean, this just seems like something you've always been interested in, but like the podcast did start as one thing and it just kind of grew and evolved into something different. So, how did that shift happen?
That's a great question. How did it happen? Okay, so I think that when you start a podcast or you start anything, first of all, I'm a big proponent of just like if you want to do something, just start doing it and then you'll figure out what you actually want. You're not going to figure it out unless you just start doing it, right? You're not going to like think your
Right.
way through it. So I was like, well, I want to like play around with podcasting. Let me try this thing out. And I had this idea. It was going to be this like tightly scripted, not scripted, tightly segmented 30-minute ish podcasts, and then I started doing it and I was like, ha ha ha, you know, like that, like, oh, that was a silly idea that, Andrea, who now knows that she has ADHD, thought that she was going to just like stick to a script and not talk for more than 5 minutes about a thing. Right. And so, I don't know. I just started doing it and I was really enjoying having the conversations with people about books. And then after doing that for like, 30, 50, 60 times, I think that it's just like the conversations I wanted to have as the, consistent part of that process was like that started to evolve where
Yeah.
it's like okay, great, like I've had a conversation about a book like this. Now I want to kind of talk about 5 books together, or you know what I mean, like start to broaden that out a bit, and started getting really curious about what romance scholarship had to say about these things, and just kind of started my own foray into reading romance scholarship. And then I learned that the best way to understand romance scholarship was just to invite a romance scholar onto the podcast so that they could kind of answer all the questions I had about things.
Yeah.
And then, so I don't know. I think it's just like really my own journey in the field where, when I first started the podcast, I think the thing I really wanted was just to talk about books with people because I didn't have people, IRL who I could talk about romance with. So that was kind of like the first thing I needed. And then what I needed and what I kind of wanted to explore just continued to evolve, and grow.
Yeah. Yeah. I have to ask because you are like, your podcast is one of the few podcasts where like I will re-listen to episodes multiple times or like
Oh.
rewind multiple times. And I'm like, how is she coming up with some of these topics? Like, where is your brain that like you have like some of these topics even come to you? Is it through your research, like, oh gosh, a light bulb goes off and you're like, huh, let me jot that down and like invite this person on to come talk about it?
Okay, well, so first I have to ask, like, give me an example of one that you've re-listened to, and then I'll think about that particular one.
Oh gosh. Okay, one of my favorites, and I'm blanking on what the exact title was. I think it was maybe like 2 years ago, but it was like you did an episode on, like, witchcraft, and the professor, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on her
Oh,
name, but, like, I her
Margarita
on Twitter,
Guillory.
she's yes! Like,
Yes.
I was like, "Andrea, how did you come up with this?"
Okay. All right. Okay. So that one, okay, that one's that, and that one's kind of like maybe like a weirder like foray,
Mhm,
I think. So I had been talking to Dr. Maria de Blasi, who has been on the podcast a few times, about witchcraft in romance novels. And, in particular, we are focusing on romances by Black writers featuring Black characters.
mhm,
And I think like I I try to kind of pair like my own opinions and impressions about books with some research. And so I started just, trying to get beyond the first page of Google results on like, like black witchcraft, or you know what I mean, like whatever the
yeah,
Google search was, and found Dr. Margarita Guillory, who basically studied this. And I could not repeat the exact field that she studies. I want to say like black esoteric African diaspora something.
yeah,
Like I can't remember now, but you know, I was like, you know what? I think that just talking to the source of the scholarship here would just be a really interesting way to talk about this that goes beyond just me being like, well, this is my opinion, this is what I think. Um and so reached out to her. She was gracious enough to come join the podcast and talk to Maria and I. And then I just think it really made the conversation that Maria and I had about the books richer and just based in, I think, like expanding out a bit more. So yeah,
mhm,
that was that process. But I think a lot of times it's like the glacier analogy where what makes it onto the podcast is like the tip of the iceberg. And usually there's like 90% more reading and like just going down rabbit holes of thinking about things and then trying to come out like, okay, well, what's like a topic though? Like,
yeah.
yeah. So,
'Cause it's so crazy how, like, I mean, it was Shelf Love that really, and I think when the podcast, so it started in 2019. I had only been reading romance for 2 years. So really it was Shelf Love that, like, made me think, like, how is it that this genre is means so much to so many people and has been around for so long, but people really aren't studying it? Like, and I just think there's, like, so many aspects to it. So really, I mean, it was Shelf Love that I have to, like, thank for, like, me thinking I think just seeing things and being like, "Huh, it's gonna be interesting to see what people think about this 15 years from now and if people are studying this part of romance." Is there anything, like, how does it feel for you now? Like, the current romance that the romance feels right now, like, what do you think or what do you hope, or, like, what do you see that you're like, I'm interested in seeing where this goes. Like, looking at it academically, like, it has to mean something bigger.
mm,
Does that make sense?
yeah, yeah. Okay. So, interestingly enough, I was just having a conversation this morning with Lee Kramer and Hannah Hart's romance about The Flame and the Flower, which may ring a bell, is often spoken of as like the beginning of the modern romance novel as we kind of know it today. It was
Mhm.
published in 1972. And from the perspective of today, it feels incredibly dated, right? Where it's just like, oh my God, like what were people into with this? But but something I think is really interesting is I'm like, I feel like people in 1972 also recognize a lot of the issues with this. And, and so like 50 years later, we're kind of like questioning though, like what did people think about at the time? And and like so 50 Shades of Grey is another example of this big cultural phenomenon that kind of gets studied retrospectively, right? But is also talked about in the moment. uh and both of I guess like I've read scholarship on both of those texts. There's a lot of scholarship on them. The thing I think that's happening today that I think there will be a lot of scholarship around is it's not one book necessarily, but I think that dark romance is really interesting.
Yes. Yes.
But
It's so interesting you say that because I had a conversation with a friend recently who grew who her foray into romance as a teen was like historicals, like
Mhm.
old historicals. And she's like, Brie, I feel like those were dark romances. A lot of
Yes.
the ones that I read as a teenager, she's like, as a dark romance lover now, she's like, they feel the exact, oh, she's like, they feel very, very similar.
Yeah, yeah, I personally feel that yes, black or dark romance is, in my opinion, basically just continuing on the trend of a lot of, things that have been happening in romance for 50 plus years. But I would be fascinated to read scholarship that kind of traces that lineage, because right now I have feelings, I have a sense, I can kind of anecdotally pull that thread a bit, but I would greedily read a deep dive on dark romance. And I mean, I think that we've also yet to really see a good exploration of kind of the um, digital reading for romance, where, honestly, I think I've yet to read like a good in general explanation of kind of like how trends have changed with e-publishing. Not to say that there's nothing, but like they've, in my opinion, tended to be kind of like niche and not really just explaining how it has impacted readers so much, or kind of like what gets
Yeah.
published. But I mean, I kind of was around in romance publishing romance writer spaces when self-publishing started to be a thing, it like, or started to like be a viable option for authors. And there was a lot of interesting conversations going on at that time. And kind of getting the uh insights from the people who were there and what they thought was happening, and then having a little bit of time go by to kind of see how things have evolved. I think that'll be really fascinating, because it's, I think in a way it has really enabled dark romance as a genre to exist, because I don't think you see dark romance as it exists on like Kindle Unlimited coming out from traditional publishers, you know?
Right.
So
Yeah.
I don't know. There's so many things where I'm like, please, somebody do the deep dives. Go interview all of these people. Write a book.
And with the digital thing too, it's just like we're seeing so many like independent authors who these trad publishers are like, "Oh, let's snatch this up and put a new cover on it and now let's put it out in Barnes and Noble." And it's like I think that that's like a really interesting moment that we're kind of in right now. It's like, how does that happen, And like if an author's like, "No thanks," I wonder how often if that happens. So it's really interesting. Like I received an email recently from a publicist like The Wall of Winnipeg and Me. I think that's what it's called. Mariana Zapata.
Mhm.
They're traditionally publishing that now, and I'm like, "That book came out so long ago." But I mean, it's like one of her big novels, and it's just like, why choose that one and why now? Are people talking about it on TikTok? I haven't personally seen it, I don't know, but, like, I I hope somebody's paying attention and eventually, yeah, the digital moment, because I feel like so many romance readers read mostly on Kindle anyway, so it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, yeah. And that too, I mean, that's another fascinating topic. Basically how publishers are using self-pub as a way to kind of vet and discover, quote unquote, authors that then they can put the full brunt of their publishing machine behind. I don't quite blame them. It is a smart strategy, because traditional publishers don't have the same data that Amazon has about
Mhm.
what's working. I mean, like Amazon's platform, they know so much about our reading habits, and how far into a book we read. With Kindle Unlimited, that's literally the model where they know what readers want, and that gives them so much power. And the best that trad publishers can do is kind of be like, okay, well, what's selling really well on Amazon? That's a good indicator of what people want. But I mean, it's just a very different field, and the power
Yeah.
dynamics are very different, right? Because I think of Lucy Score a lot with this, because she was so massively successful doing self pub, and now she's also, some of her books, or a lot of her books, are getting traditional publishing deals. But I think she still retains a lot of rights to, like, for example, the digital versions, or I think that she comes into that in a much stronger position than an author who is unknown and doesn't kind of have a pre-existing audience, who kind of has to just say yes to whatever a publisher wants to take in terms of rights.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I just think like I watch what she's doing all the time, and I'm just like fascinated at how her career has evolved and how she's been able to kind of leverage traditional publishing while at the same time maintaining freedom. And I mean, she just has a ton of power in that, at that negotiating table.
Well, I have like 2 questions that I'm like, okay, I don't know which one to ask first. So I'm going to ask this one and hopefully it'll just lead into the next one. So tell me like your romance origin story and then I'm going to get into another one of my like favorite kind of series that you've done, but I feel like they may tie in together. So take us back, young Andrea, when did you like pick up your first romance and like really fall into the genre?
Okay, so I think probably the first romance I read, I was at my aunt's house and there was a romance novel like on the back of the toilet, you know, and I think it was like a zebra romance. It definitely had that like holographic little sticker,
Oh,
and
yeah.
I think it was pirates or something. It was some sort of like 1990s era full bodice ripper, like adventures. They're on a ship, they're all over.
Painted cover.
Oh my god, glorious, right? And I could not tell you what that book was. I think that I just tried to read it as much as I could while I was there. And then you know, I was a library kid. My parents read, but like there were no romance novels in our house, and I knew both explicitly and implicitly that it would not be cool for me to be reading romance novels in my household. So I was excellent at sneaking them into my house. Like I would go to the library and get library books. I would, you know, when I got a little bit older. So like I probably read the first when I was 12ish, and then you know, had a little bit more independence growing up, and, you know, would go to the bookstore and would get a romance novel. And I literally had a secret pocket in my purse where it was like the seam, the lining of the purse where I could go to the bookstore, get a book, put it in there, and then come home. I had authoritarian parents also, so they would like search my bag and stuff, which is depressing. But I loved them, and there was nothing you could do to keep me away from them. I ended up volunteering at the Friends of the Library book sale, where I would spend hours in this kind of like stinky room with just like books everywhere, books on the floor, and I would sit in the romance section and ostensibly be putting price stickers on the books, but really just be sitting there pouring through the romance novels that were there. So,
Yeah.
you know, and
Gosh.
so it started early, and I think that so that would have been the, you know, late 90s, early 2000s. And so, you know, think about what books would be at a library book sale at that time. Like I really got that education in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s romances, and then just kind of kept reading from there. So, yeah, that was the start.
I swear, like romance readers will find a way. Like, oh, my purse has this hidden pocket. Here it goes.
You know, it's so funny though, because I think that if it hadn't been so forbidden, I don't know if I would have been as determined. So there is a certain element of, because I knew it was forbidden, it became even more desirable. And like I was just a little rebel, and I still am. I was just like, you can't stop me. I'll move hell or high water through hell, whatever that saying
I
is. Like I'll make it happen.
I will find a way, right. Well, so you did some episodes where you I was like, "Bless her," because I don't know if I could do this. You read through, like, some old teen categories. What were they called? I'm thinking Sunfire. Is that what they
Oh,
were called? What were
Sunfire.
they called?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. So, okay, did you read those as did I mean, I'm assuming probably not. Like, eh,
Yeah, they were a
how was it,
little.
like, reading those as an adult?
Oh my god. Okay. So yeah, so the Sunfire historical romances, I want to say they started being published in 1984 or thereabouts.
Mhm.
So that would have been, I was born in 1986. So those were a little bit before my time. The the teen romances that I did remember reading were the Avon true romances, or is that what they were called?
Mm.
They were historicals, published in the early 2000s, and they were written by adult historical romance writers, so like Beverly Jenkins, Lorraine Heath, Meg Cabot, who of course also wrote teen stuff, and a few other authors. And I do remember reading those, and I also loved this disaster historical romance series. I can't remember the publisher, but there was like one about the Hindenburg and the San Francisco earthquake. And
Mm,
I mean, those ones I was just,
interesting.
oh my God, those are, I mean, I have those on my shelf. They're amazing. But so I wanted to kind of look at YA romance because I was kind of curious how many romance readers became adult romance readers via teen romance. And I mean, like, I think like the YA market is just so different today. It's much more mature. I think like in the 80s,
Yeah.
90s, early 2000s, publishers of adult romance were like, let's see if we can kind of seed the ground for adult romance, or like, I don't know, try romance explicitly in these lines for younger readers. And it's interesting to me because I don't really feel like you get lines like this today. Like there's a lot of
Right.
YA
Yeah.
with romance, but it's not
Yeah.
like this. Um, some of the I like
You can
everything.
barely get a paperback in YA these days. I
I
feel like
know.
it's all like straight to hardcover.
I know. Well, I so reading them, they were like hit or miss, like everything. Like some of them are hardly readable. Some of them were kind of fun, and then of course with my adult eyes, I had thoughts. But I was enjoying them. I do find that I think I always, even as a teen, would get frustrated that like the kisses didn't happen as frequently as I wanted, or they'd never progressed beyond the kisses. So, like, my personal time in teen romance, it was like I would read them because I would go to the children's library and they would be there and it'd be the closest to what I wanted. But like I basically skipped over teen romance and went straight to adult because like Fade to Black is not for me. No bedroom scenes, not for me.
Yeah, I was wondering, like, when you introduced the series that you were doing, I was like, did she have these? Like, did somebody pass them down to her? Because I was born in '86 too, so I feel like we had. I don't really remember it being called YA. Like, I feel like we had Goosebumps, Boxcar Children, and Babysitter's Club, which was already a little bit older than us.
Hmm.
But I don't know, like not too much older. And then I think I'm like, what did I read from like seventh grade on? Because I don't really remember there being books. I mean, I remember everybody being huge American Girl fans, reading those.
Hmm.
Sweet Valley, but that again, that was like those were books passed down to them. So when you did that, I was like, oh man, there was like I started looking into it. I'm like, wow, there were all these books, like teen romance books, but they were like 10 years or not like within 10 years earlier than us. Like we had
Hmm.
just missed the boat. And then I just feel like it was kind of quiet there for a while.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm by far not an expert, but I do have books on my shelf from around the like when I was like teen, preteen, and I feel like what was really big at the time was I have things like Ella Enchanted and just Ella, lots of like fairy tale type books that were slightly more mature than middle grade, I guess. There was Amelia Atwater Rhodes was writing these like vampire books. And what's wild is she was like 16 when she was writing those. So she was basically
Oh
the
wow.
age of her readers. It was truly
Yeah.
wild. But like, I mean, so I remember a few things that I read at the time that were slightly more mature from what, Goosebumps type era or like Babysitter's Club.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like I skipped really quickly into adult. My so I, again, like I'm a collector of romance, so I have some books from when I actually was a teen, but then one of my listeners, Jess, who I have had the privilege of becoming friends with because she actually lives nearby to me too, since she was a listener of the podcast and then we just became friends. She read Sunfire Romances when she was younger, and they were even a little bit like before her time, but she could find them in used bookstores. And she was like, "Oh, have you ever read a Sunfire?" I was like, "No, I've never even heard of them." And so I went onto eBay and I bought a lot of like, this was like for Christmas. I gave myself a gift for Christmas of just like buying this like $100 lot of, I don't know, 10 or 13 of these books, just like on a whim. I was like, "Oh, let me
Yeah.
just like,
Oh my
I
God.
instead I won't just buy one, let me buy a lot of them."
Yeah.
And I got them and I didn't crack one open, but for some reason had the compulsion to collect all of them. And so I literally then like sat down and made like a spreadsheet. I was like, "Well, now I got to get all of them," and came up with like a whole plan to like get the complete set. And only once I had all of them did I read even one of them. Um Book
Yeah, that's how our
collecting,
brains work.
oh my god, it's a sickness, like, truly. But, and I wanna, now I can't remember, I'm literally looking at it. I wanna say there's, like, 36 of them or something like that. Um, so yeah, no, I don't know, the collector compulsion kind of hit me first, and then I was like, "Oh, I just invested way too much money in these. I should read one and make some content for my podcast." Yeah. I'm
Have you
weird.
been, like, randomly collecting anything else? Because I feel like, oh gosh, like, I've been there was this old category series called Kismet, and
Mm.
my only issue is, like, at this point, like, I can never find, like, the first, like, 1 through 50. So now I'm, like, trying to piece together and get those older, like, those or the original, like, the first 1 through 50 or whatever, but it's, like, duplicates, and I'm like, "I don't need
Oh.
3 copies of book number 65."
Oh my god. Okay, so are you trying to collect all of them? Like the full set?
I want all because I think there was maybe like 100 and I don't know, 60 or something, like nothing crazy. And
Mhm.
people actually, when I do find the lots on eBay, they're not too expensive, but it's like those earlier ones people are like
Mm.
holding on to.
Yeah, I mean, there were definitely with Sunfire a few that I had to pay a premium for, like, as one-offs, and, I mean, it definitely took some, like, searching and kind of, talking myself into, like, "It's okay to spend $30 for this book." But, you know what I mean? Like, but I think the fun thing about romance collecting is that it's a relatively cheap hobby for these
Yeah.
older books, because a lot of times you can get them for like less than $1 a book, especially if you get lots. And so I mean, in terms of other, you want to, hey, if you want to collect new books, you're talking about $20 plus for book per book. Or I mean, like, even paperbacks now are what, like $8 minimum, right?
Oh yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so I think, used book collecting, especially ones that are in the market not valued super highly, it's a cheap hobby. But yeah, so I definitely had to just like bite the bullet and shell out a little bit more for some of them. But I, like I I really started collecting adult romance more seriously when Steve Amidon like flagged on Twitter that somebody was selling these just like huge lots of older romances. And the reason I'm saying that kind of like angrily is because I'm just like shaking my fist like, why did you do this to me?
I know.
because because I got
Anytime he pops up with a new reel, I'm like, "Oh god, Steve."
yeah, I literally got in the course of like 3 auctions in 1 hour period, like 270 romances or something like that. And I got them all and I was like, "Okay, what do I got?" And then it was like, "Oh, well, maybe I should finish this collection," or, and it was not good because I just like some of those I was like truly like I have no interest in reading or studying these at all. So I'm trying to get choosier about what I collect intentionally and then let go of some of the things where it's like I have like a quarter of a collection and I'm like, okay, I just need to like sell this because this is taking up space that I could use to finish my Harlequin Blaze collection.
Yes.
Or,
Oh gosh, are you trying to collect all this?
I told my husband I wouldn't because I want to say there's almost 1,000.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
okay, hold on. I'm gonna like turn around and I'm looking at how many I have. I definitely have more than 300 right now.
Oh my gosh.
And And I've already started to hit where I'll try to get a lot, and then like half of them are duplicates. And I'm just like, ugh, it's so annoying.
Yeah.
So I might need to just force myself to not try to collect them all because I don't need it. I've got more than enough that if I want to dip in and study them and think about them, I have more than enough. I do not need every single one. I'm convincing myself right now.
So like so how did you get into category? And is Blaze your fave or do you have a fave?
Okay, so I don't know if I have a fave. Again, I mean, look, you already know about me. I like the spicy romance. Is
You
it
do. You do.
is it any surprise that I am drawn to Blaze? I one summer, I at the summer after my freshman year of college, I still had ties to the library book sale. I went in and I think I just got this huge stack of I think it was Harlequin Blazes. It was either Blaze or Desire, but I do remember them being really sexy, so I think they must have been Blaze. And so this, hold on, if I was in if I was in college, this
It
had
could
to
have been
be,
Temptation. Were they red?
I think they were red, but wait, so this was like 2006? Was
Mm-hmm.
hold on. Blaze, I literally had to pull a book off my shelf. Blaze started in 2001 or earlier.
Yeah.
So it might have been Blaze, right?
Okay.
Or I don't know, I think it was red. So I had a whole bunch, and like the one routine I had that summer, I was like working at H&M, and like none of my friends were around. So I would like go to the gym and like go on the elliptical and like go to work, and that was kind of like all I did. And every time I would go to the gym, I would take a book and I would just like read the whole book. like uh that's what I did all summer. And it was just so, it was like the one routine I had. It was so comforting. I never had to worry about like running out of things to read at the gym because like I don't love the gym, you know. I talk myself into the gym, or like personally, like I take a walk every morning and I love walking, but basically the way I get myself to put on my shoes and get out the door is I'm like I can listen to a podcast. So
Right. Yeah.
I need something to just kind of like get me to do the thing, and then I'm fine doing the thing. And the category romances that summer were my thing. And then it's like I went back to school in the fall, and I don't think I read another one for a long time. It's just isn't it weird? I mean, you and I are probably just so invested in reading romance now. It's hard to remember a time when it was just this small part of your life that you didn't think too much
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
But so that was probably like my first hardcore introduction to category. And then really I think I've only come back to it fairly recently, dipping into some of these older lines. Like I do, one line I find really fascinating is the Second Chance at Love series, which, have you heard of
Mm.
that one?
I've heard of it, but I haven't read anything yet from it.
Okay, so I have a very small collection of that, like only like 30 of them. And and what's interesting is, so they're like I could not tell you exactly what year, but like mid 80s, let's say. And at the time, like a lot of category, it was still very much like, the ingenue virgin heroine, and um still very like young heroines, especially. And this line is interesting because a lot of the heroines are older, and by older sometimes like 28, but
Okay.
sometimes, like in their 30s and even older. And it's like either they're very, the use of second chance is interesting because it's sometimes a second chance romance, like this couple got divorced and now they're trying again, or they broke up in the past and are getting back together. And sometimes it's a second chance as in like this person had one relationship before this, and now like they are getting a second chance at love with a different person, which
Okay.
which is just such a dated understanding of what
Yeah.
that means. Like, she's used goods, but we'll give her another shot. um so I find it interesting in the context of the time, like the experiment that they were trying. It's, and so they're like a little bit older, a little bit more established, a little bit more independent heroines. But again, like with everything, they're hit or miss. Like
Yeah.
one I'm like, oh, this could be written today, and then I'll read another one and can,
You're like, oh.
like I can't get past like the first couple pages.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's why I was excited. So, like, we read Kiss together, and I was like,
Mhm.
I can't wait to get your thoughts on Kiss, because I feel like with like this new line that's coming out, you hear like little bits and pieces about it. Like, we haven't heard much about it, but I'm like, it feels like the combination of a little bit of Blaze, a little bit of Kiss, some temptation, some dare, and it's like, what is it actually going to be? So, had you heard of Kiss prior to this? Like, had you read anything?
Okay, so I think I'm trying to think why I even came across Kiss. I might have seen you post about it, and then I got curious and I bought a few books because that's like
That's what we do.
that's what we do. I see somebody talk about something, I'm like, I've never heard of that before. Let me just immediately go to like Abe Books or eBay and buy a few just so that I have them on my shelf the next time I get curious about this. So I think that intentionally I got number 1 because I wanted to see, like, I was like, "Well, if I eventually create a collection of this, I'm gonna want, like, the first couple books."
The first one.
Yeah, so I got the, like, early ones, and actually for today's conversation, I did read literally number 1. Yeah, so I had never read them, and I don't remember them from the time they were coming out, but I had a few on my shelf, and what I think is interesting about this line is it's it does seem to be like this weird middle ground where they seem to be trying to go for the kind of chick lit rom-com thing,
Yeah.
like, oh, it's like lighthearted and the covers are definitely shooting for that. And I think there's like a mix of kind of spice level, right? Like this one was kind of fadish to black, but like, oh, there was like a little bit of explicit sex and then kind of a little bit more euphemistic, I guess. Um but it's hard to kind of pin down what this line is. And
Mhm.
uh it didn't last very long.
No, yeah, like a year. I think,
Yeah.
2013 to 2014. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's, oh my god, I'm looking at the price on this. It was $2.60.
Isn't that crazy?
But this is from 2013. That seems low.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe I wonder if it's because, oh, it's because it's the intro one. So then if I look at number 10, it's $5.
Okay,
Okay, so
yeah.
it must have just been the
Okay.
like get them on the hook. But yeah, no, I like I was a full adult in 2013 and I never saw these. What about you? How did you come upon it?
I don't remember how I was not reading romance when these were coming out, so I was, like, 2017 when I picked up my first one. I think I discovered Kiss just b I think there's a blog out there, I'll have to find it and link it in the show notes, but they did, like, a whole thing on old category lines that are gone, and I think it was there that I discovered it, and so, of course, I went to Fiction Database, and just from like chatting with the authors and stuff, like I've heard authors that are like, "Oh yeah, I wrote for Kiss back in the day." I know overseas it was called Riva in some places, and for a while it was Presents Extra. Like overseas, they would like I think in the UK especially, like they didn't even they kind of just did it as an extra presents because they wouldn't sell as Kiss if they didn't market it as that. So even I guess over here, some of the earlier ones, I mean, I have a physical copy of the Kelly Hunter that you read. I haven't read it yet, but like I was told, like if you can't find a bunch of Kiss on eBay, you might have to look at it, like search for Presents Extra because that's how some of them were sold.
Interesting.
But yeah, like I always wonder like how they sold over here. Because I don't know. I think that, but I think like my theory is whenever these books were obviously like kind of written for like early to mid 20 I think year old women, and I really think that there's still kind of like an age demographic with category that is older than that and
Mm.
probably didn't want to read that.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. I mean, definitely when I read the descriptions, because I haven't read deeply in this, but when I read the descriptions, they definitely feel like that era's rom-com movies, like
Mhm.
How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days and, that feel. And the reason I wanted to talk about Kiss, because you suggested like, do you want to talk about this or this? I thought it would be interesting to read because I was like, well, I would have been around the age of these characters when they were coming out.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I mean, in fact, I was like married in 2013, but but I got married a little bit young. But like, I thought it would be interesting. And you know another interesting thing I find about these is they're all sort of written in like British English with like the quotations are like a single curly thing instead of a double on the quotes and stuff. It definitely feels very like British influenced, and also interestingly, the one I read actually took place in Australia.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Okay.
I don't want to say that like Americans can't handle that, but it does make it also feel like a little bit even more removed from my experience.
Mm.
I don't know.
Okay. So because mine, I read a Joss Wood, and she's a South African author, and it's set in South Africa. So that makes a lot of sense. I need to actually look and see if how many American authors there were, because other two that I read a couple months ago were by Allie Blake, who's also an Australian author. So I'm like, how many were there any American writers that actually wrote for the line? It would be interesting to see, but that could definitely be a reason why, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. I do know that the acquiring editor was based in England. I found an old article that told me that, but
Hmm.
I don't know. I think if I had to guess why this line didn't quite take off, I think there was a mismatch. If the n equals 1 of my experience with this is accurate, I think there was a mismatch between how it was marketed and what was actually found inside, because the descriptions and the covers definitely give me that like lighthearted, bright, colorful, sexy, whatever. But then, and like, a little bit of adventure, but very much like young people being young, like having sexy dating adventures. And then
Yes.
the one I read was honestly, it was a really good book. I immediately went and bought more Kelly Hunter books afterwards, actually.
Because that's what we do.
Exactly. I like looked on my shelf. I was like, do I have any other Kelly Hunter Harlequin kisses or by any other lines? And I couldn't find any. So I bought some ebooks, but I really liked the book, but it didn't match at all the vibe I was getting from the cover. Or I mean, I think the way the line is described, I can't even remember how they described the line, but like, oh, it's a little bit closer to like the alpha male thing, that I think they were like
Yeah.
trying to kind of get on that bandwagon, but like it's not that. It's not fun flirty. Like the one I read was kind of angsty, and they were I think a little bit more mature than I was expecting. Like I didn't think that was a bad thing. I actually really enjoyed it maybe because of that, but I was expecting younger characters.
Mm. Okay. Yeah.
Which was
Yeah, these feel like they feel like, because it presents, it's all like the home of the alpha hero. Kiss kind of feels like your presents hero before like his daddy issues really kick in.
oh my
I don't know.
god.
It's like they're striving to be like these alpha males, but we're not quite there yet. Okay, so tell me about the book, because I haven't read that one yet.
Okay. So The One That Got Away by Kelly Hunter. So this is number 1, published in February 2013. And interestingly, the back cover is wrong. Like it's presented as the man who's always left her wanting more. Good job, tick. Newly purchased apartment, tick. Evie's life is on a pretty even keel at the moment. The only thing missing, a man with an edge to keep things interesting. Enter Logan Black. Tortured, distant, and sexy, Logan has edge written all over him. He's also the man who tipped Evie over the edge a few years back. She gave him everything, but he didn't know when to stop taking. Leaving Logan was the hardest thing Evie's ever done, until now, because Logan's back. The chemistry is as blistering as ever, and this time, he's not going anywhere. And that presents what happens in this book almost like a mirror image at every point. Like, first of
Okay.
all, she like good job tick, she like owns a company with Logan's brother, not that she knows that he's Logan's brother. Newly purchased apartment, tick, she has owned her apartment for 6 years at this point. Like what? And then the way Logan is presented as like he's like this edgy bad boy, but in the book he's literally like a billionaire or like multimillionaire who is this in-demand consultant, owns this company that like multinational company that I don't know, does like real estate investing or something. It doesn't even matter. Like I was expecting a guy on like a motorcycle with like a leather jacket. And then the whole thing about like he kept taking and didn't know when to stop taking. He's the one who is like ruthlessly holding himself in and doesn't want to take too much, so leaves her. And like the
Mm.
dynamics are just presented again just like totally opposite from the story. But so I thought what was really interesting about this is it starts with her business partner uh being like, we should get married in a fake relationship so that I can get access to my trust fund to benefit our company. And she's like, okay, sure. Goes back to his mom's house and they're like going to have an engagement party and they're still going to pretend like they're in love. That goes downhill real fast because his half brother shows up, Logan, and immediately Logan is like, you have to get away from here. I'm going to pay you off to get away from here. And she's like, no, I have a backbone now. And literally like in the space of this afternoon, like the engagement is off immediately. They're like talking about the failed relationship, like which basically was just like a week-long sex orgy with some like light BDSM 10 years prior, that Logan and the heroine, oh my god, what's her name, Evie, had with his mother and her business partner, ex-fiance, his half brother. And like Logan storms off and the mother's like, you should go follow him. And then they end up having sex like immediately and like have sex in the shower and then have to go to this like fake engagement part. Like it's so not what I was expecting.
What's going on, right?
And it was really interesting. Like there was this very interesting idea running throughout where like his father was abusive and you know, abused his mother and abused him, and he's interested in having sort of like rough dominant sex with the heroine, but
Mm.
his like big fear is that he will actually hurt her and like not know when to stop, and you know that he won't be able to contain it or something, which is interesting.
Yeah.
And like basically the entire time Evie's like, I'm not worried at all. And like they just have this like very delicate sort of like giving each other space as they live in completely different continents for half of it. And then make it work. But like I don't know how to explain it. I really enjoyed it, but it was not at all what I was expecting.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I read, like I said, I read a Joss Wood, so it's called If You Can't Stand the Heat. And it's literally the cover is a girl on the counter with the guy standing up next to her. And I actually, now that I think about it, I'm like, I don't really remember any steamy scenes, but maybe I forgot. But this is the 30th book in the series. And it is set in South Africa, pretty near Cape Town. And so the heroine is Ellie, and then we have Jack, who is the hero. And how their paths cross was really interesting because Ellie's dad is a war reporter. And so she has daddy issues because he was always like, I'm going to take the assignment over being a dad, basically. But I guess he has this tendency, this history of like, if any of his colleagues need a place to stay, kind of volunteering his daughter's house as an Airbnb. And I'm just like, my dad would
What?
never volunteer like my place that I live in for like random men he works with, but whatevs. So Jack has recently been on assignment in Somalia and has been beaten up pretty bad. And so her dad's like, oh, go stay with, you can stay with my daughter at her place. So he shows up. I mean, she's like, whatever, like, I can see you're pretty banged up. You can stay here, kind of thing. So it's interesting because I feel like I read a lot of category where there's already some built in chemistry. Like, I've read a lot of like Second Chance or Childhood Friends to Lovers or whatever. It's like it's been a while since I feel like I've read one where they don't know each other. So I feel like in a lot of ways it's you try to do a lot of front loading, but it still makes it just a little slow almost in the beginning. So it took me a while to like get into it. But once we get into the story, it's like Jack is this he had a heart transplant at 17, and obviously, like, the donor died, and so he lives with that survivor's guilt, and I really, like, appreciated kind of, like, how Joss Wood delved into that. He just kind of, like, is, "I don't wanna be tied down to one place. I wanna live my life. I wanna do all the things that I wanna do," because he will never get the chance to do that because he died and I'm here. And then of course with Ellie, it's like she kind of just bitches and bitches about her dad, and then it's like
Oh
he
boy.
shows up and all is forgiven, and I'm like, you've complained the whole time about him, but whatever. And she also just has this, I think with her character arc, it was kind of showing that she has maybe unknowingly allowed a lot of the people in her life to kind of walk all over her. Like at the very beginning, her best friend has had a baby and is done like her maternity leave, and but asks, can I be off for like another month? Ellie owns a bakery, and she's like, my mom is literally like on a year-long vacation. I'm running this by myself. I need your help. But also like you just had a kid. So okay, got it. And it's like, no, girl, she has to learn, like, you either show up back to work or you don't. Like, I know we're best friends, but I will have to fire you. Like, I have a business to run. So I mean, it was interesting to see that, but she's also just like really kind of passive at the same time. But I mean, the romance was fine. Like, it was like it wasn't a new favorite kiss. I was like, oh man, I don't know. I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but I think I enjoy reading these because I'm like, I don't know. Sometimes you read these and you see things in these as a category line that I'm like, I don't think I would have seen this anywhere else, which is interesting because the line has been over with now for so long. But I do think some of these books just touched on things that, I you don't see in category anymore, or sometimes even in romance. So yeah, I thought it was fun. It was fun. I love the South African setting. That is, and Joss would have like living there. She really just, I don't know, you feel like you're there, you feel totally immersed, and it's a nice escape from like North America, I feel
Hmm.
like. So yeah, it was good. It was good.
Yeah.
So do you think you'll read more?
Okay, that's a very good question. Do you know what I found? I really dithered over which book to read for a long time. Where, I literally have like 30 of them, and I went through every single one, read the back covers, kind of flipped through them. And there were a few like that looked promising, and then I flipped through them and I was like, ugh, like, no, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Like there was like one where I was flipping through, and she was like ashamed to introduce him to her family, and it was sort of a misunderstanding, but it was definitely one of those like he wasn't good enough for that family type of thing. Like he was like of a lower class, and that was definitely part of why she didn't want to introduce him. And I was like, ew, no, like
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
gross. Like about like I was like, I can't get behind a heroine who's like that. Stop. And so there were a few things like that where I was just like, oh no. And then this one, I think eventually I was just like, you know what? No, I'm just going to read number one. And I started at the beginning, and I think I was a little bit worried that I wasn't going to get into it, but I got pulled in. And I mean, I read the whole thing just like in 3 hours on my couch, like in one sitting, like, which it's not often that I do that with a book these days. And I guess I started thinking, I was like, I wonder how much of this has to do with like I think I overthink the investment I'm going to make by starting a book, and I try to use all these other things to decide if I want to read it or not. Like, have I heard of the author? And I hadn't heard of a lot of these authors because I mean, I'm
Mhm.
not the deepest into category romance. And like I know names here or there, but I don't know all of them. And or like I read the back of the book, or I flipped through to a random page, and I was using that as sort of like a, am I going to like this, and really overthinking it. And I just had to like immerse myself in the experience. And as soon as I was immersed and transported, I was into it. And like, so, which is just to say that I think that I have to I think I have to like let go of the idea that I can understand if I'm going to like a book before I start reading it,
Yeah,
and
I feel you. Yeah.
just like start one. And then if I don't like it, I don't like it. But it's so hard to tell from all the other things beforehand.
Well, I want to ask you one more thing before we get off here. What like what's the response been? Like, do you hear from your listeners, like, are there topics that you've covered that people were like, "Oh wow, I never would have thought of like how hearing that conversation. I never would have thought of that as being a topic to cover." Another one of my faves. You did an episode. I think your guest was from like Australia, and you talked about soap operas, and I'm like, I love this because I mean, I remember growing up as a kid and spending time with my nan and like her watching Young and the Restless, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so brilliant, Andrea. So, like, what's do people reach out to you? Do you feel like there are specific episodes that are just like people's faves? Like, what's the response been?
Okay, so the episode that you're talking about was this very short-lived series called Tell Me About that
Tell
I
me about, yeah.
did. It was with Dr. Jody McAllister, who is a romance scholar. She's actually the vice president of the International Association for the Study of Popular
Oh,
Romance.
yay.
She also is a fiction writer. She writes like rom-coms, and some of them actually are like she's also really into reality shows. So they take place on kind of these like reality show sets, which is super fun. And yeah, she's also a romance scholar and really into soap operas. You know what's interesting is the reason that was kind of a short-lived series was what I was playing around with was how romantic love shows up in different media.
Mhm, mhm.
And very quickly it occurred to me, and I would let me just say, like, those were maybe not the most popular episodes.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, what I quickly realized was that different genres, different mediums are just like so different, and it's kind of like unfair to look at them through the eyes of like the requirements of a romance novel. Like
Okay,
like for
yeah.
example, like soap operas don't end. So
They don't end,
you
yeah.
can't have a happily ever after. It like they never end. Which is so they need to like have the drama, they need to like always they get together, they break up, like all this stuff. And I was like, I'm actually not interested in studying romantic love more broadly. Like I really am actually just fascinated by romance novels. So it kind of clarified things like that for me. But I do think also like maybe like the listener feedback I got from that was like, this is deviating from the thing I know how to do and the thing that like I'm really here for. And I think a lot of other people are here for. Um, I,
Okay.
I think probably
Yeah.
like what I get the most feedback on where people are just like, "Oh my god, like thank you for putting into words like what I kind of felt or thought about but like wasn't able to articulate, or you articulated it really clearly, like that was really helpful to hear other people like know that other people are thinking about this and hear you have a conversation about it." Is I think it tends to be those like bigger picture genre discussions, like pulling together things across books, maybe across subgenres, or picking up on kind of those like the bigger picture trends and making sense out of them. Because I think romance readers, like even if they truly are just reading to enjoy it, like they have thoughts about how it's impacting them and how the texts are not directly speaking to each other, but like building something in the reader's mind. So like the texts are kind of speaking together in the reader's mind. I think that like romance readers love to think about that and are maybe also always trying to like optimize like what do I enjoy, what do I not enjoy in the things that I'm reading, which requires a certain amount of like parsing. Oh, I just read a book. What did I actually enjoy about this? And like, oh, I just
Mhm.
read two books in a row that did this and I didn't like it. Let me try to put my finger on what that was. Or, oh my God, this reminds me of a book I read 30 years ago, or, whatever the case is. So I guess like that feels like the thing that people are the most vocal about, kind of, like, oh my gosh, thank you. you know?
Yeah.
And I think those also tend to be the ones where like, um, I don't want to say this is like my brand, but my brand's like, look, I love romance novels. I have been reading them for a really long time. I'm really endlessly fascinated by them, but I don't think they're like perfect. And
Yeah. Yeah.
and you know, I think that there's a way to kind of enjoy the genre as a whole and enjoy individual books and, you know, be critical of the genre and be critical of books and be critical of authors sometimes. And that doesn't diminish my love for the genre. And I'm not trying to diminish anyone else's love for the genre. I just don't think it's personally very honest to love something uncritically, because how can you love something if you refuse to kind of accept what it is fully?
Okay, promise this is the last thing. The one of another fave was the fairy tale retelling episode that you did, because I was like, oh man, that is fairy tale retellings are so huge, and like Harlequin presents, I just loved that whole conversation. Like the whole point of fairy tales and oral storytelling was to kind of keep the stories going, and I'm like, I see them so much now that I'm a romance reader. Like you
Mm.
see authors and their depictions and whatever of these tales like all the time.
Yeah, and so that was okay. So other two other Australian guests. So there was the one about Cinderella and Beauty and the Beast, and that was with uh oh my gosh, Pod Culture Oz, Philippa, and Renee Dahlia, who's a romance writer, and Philippa Borland from Pod Culture Oz were my guests. And we talked about Cinderella and Beauty and the Beast and kind of like the Disneyfication, but then also, how different romance novels have explored the ideas. And also around that time, did you also listen to the one with Dr. Nicola Welsh Burke around? Um, it was like Teen Werewolves and Red Riding Hood.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, and she's also
Because
Australian.
Red Riding Hood is my favorite fairy tale retelling. It's my
Yeah,
fave.
they're great, and so I think there's so much to say. For some reason, the Australians have so much to say too about how fairy tales have kind of influenced our ideas of romance, and like why romance writers love to play with fairy tale tropes. Like I was talking earlier about all the teen romances I read that were basically like Cinderella retellings.
Mhm.
um there is so much to say about that, but I think
Does it kind of feel like the fairy tale part of it, in a way, like it's kind of become a trope? Because it's like you know what to expect. Like if I say, oh, it's a Beauty and the Beast retelling, you
mhm.
just kind of already know the potential beats it's gonna hit. Like, does it feel like that? That's what it's
Yes.
becoming for you?
Well, what's interesting is I feel like, and this is a criticism of it, is that so many people like borrow certain high level beats, but they kind of like forgot the purpose of those beats.
Mhm.
Like they kind of borrow the most obvious parts of it, but that doesn't align with the part that makes the story interesting, like to me or to most people.
Right. Yeah.
um and like Disney versions of fairy tales also do that. They oftentimes completely miss the point of the original tale for lots of reasons. But I don't know, and obviously there's a spectrum. Like I do think that it has become shorthand, and it's like a really good like series unifier, like, oh, hey, I'm going to like pitch a fairy tale retelling series, or like linked books, right? And like this one's Red Riding Hood and this one's Beauty and the Beast, and um I understand how it's kind of marketable, but I would love to see authors do more interesting things rather than just kind of like gesture at the fairy tale. Like, what is beastliness? You know, like
Yeah.
there are so many Beauty and the Beast retellings where they're just like, and the beast is scarred or disfigured or like, is mean. And like there's a lot of like ableism in those tropes that is like harmful. There's definitely like lookism. There's all sorts of weird things going on there, and I'm like, there are so many more interesting things you can do with the idea of beastliness, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
or beauty, right? Because I think the literalness of the beauty in those stories, like also literal, like she's beautiful, cool. Can we do more? Like
Do more. Yeah.
these stories have been around for a really long time. Like, let's continue to think about what makes them relevant, or how this applies to our lives today and the purpose of those fairy tales. initially were to kind of make you think about something. And I
Yes.
mean, like maybe not always like make you think about something that like that interesting. Usually it was like really makes you think you should pray more, you know?
Yeah.
There's
I mean, I was
yeah.
reading one I read an article that, like, Beauty and the Beast, I think in France somewhere, I could be totally wrong, but,
Mhm.
like, their adaptation of it was to prepare girls for arranged marriage, and I'm like, "Oh, I would never pick up on that with a lot of the Beauty and the Beast retellings I read today."
Yeah, yeah, around that time, I definitely, like, read a lot about, you know, like, where did these come from and what was kind of the initial lesson you were supposed to learn? 'Cause, fairy tales often had this really clear didacticism to them. There was this great podcast that I listened to, it's kinda defunct now, but I think it was called Roots of Lore. And the podcaster would dive into a different fairy tale story in each one. And I mean, she interviewed folklorists, if that's the official name for those people, and um, and really kind of like got into like what was the lesson supposed to be, and like what are the different versions of it, and what do people think it meant at the time, and that's fascinating. Like I would love to see people do more with like looking at the original fairy tale and then thinking
Right,
about
yeah.
like how does that translate today, not let me watch, you know, Disney's Beauty and the Beast and then just kind of like lightly riff on it and basically just like make it slightly more romancy or you know slightly less problematic in the ways that stand out. um and that's and like, you know what, it's funny because I said that, and then like there are two Beauty and the Beast retellings that I love that are very directly influenced by Disney's Beauty and the Beast, not the original uh tales. So I mean, like it's not to say I don't enjoy those, but I also crave different things.
Yeah, because I mean, Disney's version is someone's interpretation, you know? It's
Yeah,
like, "Okay, guys, let's dig a little bit deeper here and go a little bit further back."
right.
Um, oh gosh, let's because they're so fun. They are really fun. I mean, it is what it is.
And
They're
they're
fun.
weird. They're
Yeah.
super weird. Like, and it doesn't matter if your readers understand all of the references. Like, you don't have to reference those things necessarily, but I think the weirdness definitely could inspire authors to do some interesting things.
Yeah. Let's get weird.
Let's get weirder. You know, okay, this is last thing, sorry. Something I will say is I do think that we as readers reading in 2023, especially, you know, people who haven't read deeper back in, you know, older romances, romance has been deeply weird. Like I think romance, I don't want to say romance isn't deeply weird now. I think a lot of traditionally published stuff is getting way less weird than it used to be.
Oh,
And
yeah, it feels really, like, not weird at all, to be
not
honest.
exactly. Exactly. It's like a little sanitized. Like romance traditionally has been very, very weird. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But like the one thing I ask is like, can we just get like a little bit weirder and more experimental and less like, this is what works and this is what doesn't? Like, let's be real. We do not know what works and what doesn't work. Just because somebody, even if somebody did something like it before, like if it didn't work before, it doesn't mean that the weird part is the thing that didn't work. Like I just want people to be weirder. I want the books like the way this book surprised me where I was just like, I'm sorry, why is the mother and like the like work partner and ex like why are they sitting at the table talking about this? But like that made it so fun, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Well, tell everybody where they could and should be keeping up with you online.
Okay, well, so the first thing, if you are a podcast listener, and you might be, based on the fact that you are listening to this podcast, you should check out Shelf Love. That's two words, shelf space love, on your favorite preferred podcast app. You can find lots of information on shelflovepodcast.com. I have transcripts for all of my episodes also. So if you prefer to read podcasts instead of listen, you should go there. And lately I've also been doing writing on Substack at
I love your Substack. Yes.
thank you. It's shelflovepodcast.substack.com. I've started this series of kind of like, if you're a romance reader and you're curious about romance scholarship, kind of like where to start, and I'll get progressively deeper into things, but just starting that series. Yeah, I think that's another part of the evolution of the podcast is, I love having conversations with people, but at a certain point I started to have ideas that I wanted to develop kind of on my own. And
Yeah.
so I was like, okay, well, I don't want to like go so serious and just do jump straight to journal articles. Like there's like a journal article I'll probably try to finish writing at some point. I just wanted a place to expound on an idea a little bit more than what I could do in the podcast, because I feel weird just talking to myself on the podcast. And I do it sometimes, but I like to bounce ideas off people, like if I'm
Yeah.
gonna talk.
Well, I
Sorry, go
mean,
ahead.
I was thinking, I'm like, well, I've loved you. You've done a couple like solo shows, and I'm like, they were so fun. But I can totally imagine myself trying to sit here and talk to myself, and it being so awkward. Like, thank God for the power of editing. But
Yes.
like,
Either I script it out entirely if I do it myself, where I'm basically reading something I've written, or the other thing I'll do is I will talk and just like sometimes I'll say something and then I'll just like sit there for like 2 minutes of dead air while I think of or I say a bunch of things and then I'm like, that's garbage. And yeah, I mean, thank God for editing. Indeed, I don't do well without another person completely unscripted. So,
yeah.
having a Substack where I can kind of like place those things, I think has been really helpful.
Well, I will have links to all of it. Listeners, y'all have to check out. If you are not listening to Shelf Love, you absolutely should, and you have to subscribe to Andrea's Substack. It's so good, and she has links to like all the books that she references, so and articles, so you won't be left hanging. It's so good.
I love links. Yeah, yeah. You always got to cite your sources. Like you know
Yeah.
that you like you.